Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Dr. Keith McNulty.
Hey, Directionally Correct fans, we're off this week, so here's a replay of a previous episode we thought you'd like. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack to get behind-the-scenes information, watch our videos on YouTube, or check out other episodes of the podcast on your app of choice. Thanks for listening. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
So people often have at least two citizenships through parents, right? So I have two of my citizenships. I was born in Ireland, so I'm an Irish citizen, but I have a British parent, so I get British citizenship through that. But then my third citizenship comes from the fact that I lived in Australia for 8 years. So that was long enough to become a naturalized Australian citizen. So I have three of them. But I don't hold the record in my family because my daughter has four. Because my wife is a New Zealander. So my daughter inherits that too.
Just every island covered across the globe.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's because of our mobility, every member of my family, just me, my wife, and my two daughters, every member of my family was born in a different country.
So are there any country rivalries that go on? I just feel like you mentioned Irish and then Britain. I was like, oh my gosh, that must be a powder keg. But I don't know. Are there any rivalries there?
Yeah, well, there's a rivalry in my own head for a start, right? It's like when I went in the soccer World Cups, which teams do I support? So I normally, my default is Ireland, but then if Ireland get knocked out, I'll move on to a few other countries. But I mean, the rugby is the sport where there's quite a bit of rivalry, right? Because of the New Zealanders, the Australians, and the Irish are big rugby teams. So you get a lot of that in our family.
Are you a rugby sevens guy or a full team?
Yeah, more rugby union, and I don't watch it that often. Mostly the World Cups and the internationals, the Six Nations and stuff like that. Yeah.
I don't know anything about rugby. I'm sorry. I would love to continue this conversation, but
that was the extent of my knowledge too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so maybe we do a quick introduction here, Keith. Keith McNulty, thank you so much for joining us today. So, Keith, one of the things that we do is we always have people send us bios of kind of who they are and what they're about, and I really liked yours, Keith. So you had a few little nuggets here that I wanted to share with our audience. One is that you're a trained mathematician with a doctorate in pure math, with, first of all, super intimidating because when I think about mathematics, I don't know, just it's like a whole nother language and a whole nother world. But fun fact, you hated statistics when you were younger, and then you became somewhat of a quasi self-taught IO psychologist. And the other thing that you mentioned here, which I really liked, I'm going all the way back to graduate school here, but you said that you've been on the editorial board of Personnel Psychology, and P-Psych was always my favorite journal to read from, if there is such a thing, in graduate school. So I wanted to commend you for that. Self-trained data scientist on R and Python, and like we were already talking about, a citizen of 3 countries with a family member who's also a citizen of 4. This is exciting. Thank you for joining us today, Keith.
No, it's great to be here, guys.
Well, maybe we could start, I don't know, tell us what, this is going to be really silly, but what is math? What is pure math? I'm sorry. I have to know.
It's a good question. I mean, what you study, if you study a scientific or any form of science, really, there's always going to be a math component, right? So, those of us who've studied psychology, you can't get away from doing statistics as part of that, right? There's always a quantitative element to it. And if you do engineering, there's a huge math component. If you do physics, there's a huge math component. But pure maths is really about studying math for the sake of studying math, right? There doesn't need to be an application for it to be interesting in pure math. So to give you an example of what I mean, my own personal PhD was, a problem that had remained unsolved since it was first posited in 1909. And there's still no obvious practical application of that problem, right? It's just somebody posited it, and a few mathematicians thought, "Wow, this is interesting and hard," and it gained a following, and you can try and solve it, and if you manage to make any progress, then they'll award you a degree or a PhD or whatever.
How does a guy that is a self-proclaimed math nerd merge into this from like not being a stats guy?
Yeah, and that was a long journey, right? So it dawned on me towards like my PhD was 3 years long. So like 2 years into my PhD, it dawned on me that, my original idea of just being like a professor of math, as delightful as that seemed when I was 18 or 19 or 20, didn't look so good when I was in the middle of a PhD. And the main reason it didn't look so good was one of the things that just I didn't realize until I did it was how lonely it is. Incredibly lonely profession. And
you're solving
all,
problems that nobody solved since 1900. I mean, that's like as lonely as it gets.
Absolutely. And also, like, when you do solve them, you find it difficult to find people who can actually critique your work, because it's so rare for people to be working on some of these problems, right?
Oh, that's the sweet spot right there.
Yeah, exactly. I actually went to a talk the other day by a very, very famous British popular scientist at a big arena here recently. And he said during the talk, he said, "I'm going to write some math on the board now for you guys." And as he wrote the math on the board, he said, "Are there any mathematicians in the audience?" And my wife was nudging me to put my hand up, but I just didn't want to put my hand up because there was like 10,000 people in this audience. And then he concluded there was no mathematicians in the audience, and he said, "Well, I can basically write whatever I want here, can't I?" So yeah, but it is a lonely profession. And the other issue I had with it as I was starting to come towards the end was, you think about a job, and the math, academics, particularly in the UK, are not very well paid, particularly in these types of disciplines. So you're also, have to think about if you're trying to build a family in the future, is that kind of career going to, give you the type of life you want? And both of those were coming home to roost when I was, 2 or 3 years into the PhD. And actually, straight after I finished the PhD, I went and interviewed for a position as a professor at a university, and it was through that experience that I determined I definitely don't want to do this, because the kind of the facilities and the nature of the process just told me this is not going to be much fun. And so that was my decision to kind of leave the math world behind in terms of the academic side of it. And it was through my work at McKinsey that I kind of ended up taking the journey and coming full circle and coming back to doing a lot of math in what I do now, really.
Well, that's kind of my next question. First of all, I mean, management consulting definitely probably pays more than academia does, which is good to know. But the second thing, did you because a lot of what you mentioned in your bio was a lot of self-taught, which I love, the autodidact type of background. I feel like I have a lot of that in myself. But did you learn all of that while you were working at McKinsey, or did it come before? Was it in graduate school? Like, where did this fire start in you of self-teaching?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it came in two phases, and it came through me spotting opportunities, right? So in my first 3 or 4 years working at McKinsey, I did like traditional management consulting work, worked on and led teams with clients. But I wasn't getting the buzz out of it that a lot of my colleagues were getting. It just, I felt that the fit wasn't 100% there for me with that type of work. But I had been doing some volunteering work at the company around our recruiting. And in particular, when I joined, and we're going back more than 20 years now, like many firms, the recruiting processes were very unstructured, and not a lot of the kind of IO psych guidance was being applied. And I realized, there's a huge opportunity here to make this much more scientific. And that was the beginning of my interest in IO psychology, because I basically took on a role where I said, look, give me the opportunity to bring some science into this process and to try to make sure we're being more fair, more accurate, more valid in the way we do our recruiting. But of course, I didn't have a lot of knowledge. So that kind of, I realized if I want to be good at this job, I'm going to need to know all this stuff. So I started that process, and it built up gradually depending on what I was working on. So for example, if I was working on designing evaluations, I would do a lot of work around job analyses and those sorts of things that you do when you're designing evaluations. But then, if I wanted to write tests or for use in the recruiting process or in evaluation, I would start to learn about it, item response theory and the whole basis behind that, in order to get that process moving along. But the fire was there because I saw the opportunity, and I think that tends to be what gives most of us our fire, right? Is if we see a gap, and it's a gap we're interested in, we want to fill it, then we're motivated to build the knowledge and the expertise that we need to fill that gap.
Is this how you also became like the R guru on Twitter for IO psychologists as well?
Yeah, I mean, basically, that was a similar situation. So about five or 6 years ago, a team came to speak to me in my previous role as kind of being in charge of how we do measurement and assessment at the company, and wanted to look into this idea of the extent to which advanced analytics or algorithmic analytics could be applied to evaluation and selection processes. And through that experience, I realized, there is actually a new science on the horizon here, that could fundamentally transform how we do our work, not just in IO psychology, but across many, many fields. And that made me think, okay, this is something I need to learn about, because the other thing that you think about is if you want to be really good and respected in your field, you have to stay ahead of the game on knowledge, right? So you don't want to be sitting still for too long. And so the motivation there for me was to say, I need to get to know what this stuff is. And I remember going to a people analytics conference. I think it was the Wharton People Analytics Conference way back maybe 6 years ago. And I felt there wasn't a lot of actual technical analytics content in the conference. But I decided that I need to find out, like, if I'm going to get involved in technical work, what choices should I make? Like, I can't do everything at once. So what should I start with? And I remember just walking up to two guys at the conference and saying, if you guys were to recommend like one language for me to get to know, or one tool for me to learn in this space, what would it be? And they both just said R. So then I went away and I said, okay, I'm going to learn this. And the interesting thing about that was, and Hadley Wickham, who's kind of the R guru of the world, always says this, right? Is that the only way to learn programming languages properly is to have something you need to do with them. Like, if you learn without a use case, you won't properly learn because the motivation's not there. So I remember going to my colleagues and saying, can you give me the biggest piece of analysis you've got that creates the biggest headaches, that takes the longest amount of time to do, that takes the most amount of FTEs to kind of fulfill it. And I'm going to take that and see if I can develop it in R. And if I can, let's see what the result is. And we ended up, transforming a process which took us 3 months and 5 or 6 people, as well as a whole bunch of administration in terms of printing out paper at the end of it. And we turned it into a process that ran in 30 minutes using R. And once we'd done that, the floodgates opened. And that's when I kind of just decided I need to spend my time on this, because this is really impressive stuff.
Yeah, I don't think that people really realize the power of the computer that can be unleashed through R, be it through, it's one thing to, run a logistic regression, write a little line of code or something like that, but also then loop it across variables, et cetera. You could run like 1,000 regressions in 2 minutes if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Cole knows this all too well. Like he'll call me like at 2 a.m. and be like, "Are you using the new R native piping? That's the best practices." I'm like, "Okay, Cole, whatever, man."
You're definitely lying. First of all, I'm asleep at 2 a.m. And second of all, that's not what I'm calling you about when I call you. But I appreciate.
We get these long discussions about piping all the time.
Can't stop talking about piping. You can't make this guy. I do know it's the little what it was the percent signal is the piping, right?
Oh, that's old school.
Not anymore,
man.
actually.
That's old school.
That's old school now. Yeah.
Yeah. It shows how outdated I am. Oh gosh.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one. I a lot of code that I post now, I get people commenting saying, "What is this strange symbol you're using? I've never seen it before." So a lot of people are not used to the new pipe symbol.
But this has led you on a journey to where you've now published 2 books, one on general R usage and also one on network analysis as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first book is really about explanatory modeling, and one of the things I noticed when I first got involved in this space is there was this absolute obsession with predictive modeling. And in our space, predictive modeling, there's only a very small number of situations where it's valuable, right? Because no predictive model has the level of accuracy that can help you in the high stakes situations we're often dealing with, which is kind of people's careers and lives. You can't get the kind of accuracy from these models where you could safely use them. But what I found is hugely valuable in our space is explanatory modeling, right? So a lot of my work is just going and analyzing data and then going back to my clients and explaining to them, these are the things that are affecting the process you're interested in. This is if you pull this string, this is how your outcome will change. Those sorts of conversations where you kind of can explain the phenomenon using models. And that's just been huge for me. And I just felt like not enough time is being spent on that topic, on explanatory modeling. Like a lot of people know how to run a model in Python, like a scikit-learn model. But if you ask them to explain what the output means, a lot of people would struggle. So a big reason behind that first book was just to kind of lay it out.
Yeah. Do you mind if I jump in here? Because in the past month or so, I got into an argument with somebody about, how much predictive models were overrated and how much explanatory models have, value that is untapped. And so I wrote an article about it and published it just because of that argument. But in that article, I cited you. I just wanted to be like with this person. You clearly haven't read Keith McNulty's work. And so, I was just thinking like all I needed to do was cite you because your stuff is excellent. And Scott, I think, didn't do you justice in introducing these two books. These are like some of the best free resources out there.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got the handbook on regression, and obviously the title is longer than that because it's about like modeling and people analytics. And then you've got the handbook on graphs and networks and people analytics. These are like the tome resources of the field. And obviously, like maybe the piping code gets outdated eventually, since I know you do include the code in there. But these are really, really good. And I don't know. I just want to say thank you. Can I say thank you? Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for doing this, Keith.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You're welcome. I mean, I enjoy doing it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it, obviously. And one point which I want to make, which reflects back to what Scott was asking me about, the amount of social media posting I do on coding and those sorts of things, is I wouldn't do that if I didn't get something back from it, right? And often when I'm posting ideas or code or thoughts, people will respond, and it starts a discussion. And through that discussion, I'll often learn about new ways of doing things or alternative interpretations. So it's really, we live in the world of crowdsourcing ideas now, and I'm taking full advantage of that in the way that I work and the way that I interact with others. And the books have helped that for sure. And of course, the code will get outdated, but there's always time for edition 2 and edition 3 later on down the line.
I'm a network analysis guy, and I was thumbing through your book last night, and there's things that like really struck me. Like one is you put the example data set, the first freaking thing in the book. I mean, there's other books out there that have there's packages, I think it's like SNA or Intergraph that has embedded network data, but you put it right up front. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to use, and if you want to get started, here's where we actually start, and also how to scrape social media, i.e. Twitter, which I'm probably going to do later this week or, this weekend, what have you. Yeah. Super pumped to check this out.
Yeah, Twitter has an incredible API. The amount of structured data you can get down from Twitter is great. And it's just all set up. And so you've probably seen in the book, but I do a lot of analysis around politics, because politics is an incredible set of data where network analysis really shows you some really clear results and some really interesting things.
We're talking nerd stuff here, but like, how would someone get started other than read your book on, just getting a toe into the waters of R? What's your best advice?
Well, I'll say is there's a lot more resources available to them now than there was when I first started, right? So I remember when I first started, you would have a few example courses there, but your code would often break, and sometimes your code would break. It'd take you weeks to try and figure out what went wrong with it. But nowadays, because there's been 6 years of learning behind this, there's so much material online. And I would recommend, particularly the work that the RStudio scientists pump out, like Hadley and Garrett Grolemund and people like that. They're publishing a lot of very well thought and very well structured books to help teach people about the language itself. But of course, as I said before, you need a use case. So if you really want to learn, you need to take something you're working on where you have a real incentive to get a good answer to it, and basically challenge yourself to do it in that language. And that's how you'll really learn, I think.
Yeah, the tidyverse also makes things much more simple than it used to be. Definitely.
Yeah, although there'll be people who disagree with you about that. There's the anti-tidyverse camp in the R community as well.
Yeah, so that actually leads me to my next question, which is, what community is more prickly when you're doing analytics on politics or analytics on data science, where you're putting out like R is better, Python is better, or I don't know, in the UK, is it like the Labour Party and the Conservative Party or something like that? Like which community is more prickly?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the stuff that I do in the politics space, the results that come out are generally not controversial, right? They kind of show that there are different parties and they have opposing points of view, and there's little communities within those parties, but like it's really an observation of real life, and you don't get a lot of people disagreeing with it or causing offense or anything. So there's never many issues there. I think in the actual data science community, I try my best to stay away from the argument of Python versus R, because there's no right answer to it, and whatever answer you give, you'll offend someone. But like I work with both, and there's definitely spaces where one is better for what you're doing and than the other. I would say, for example, that if you're working in natural language processing, and particularly with large language models, then Python is kind of much more ready to go in that space. But if you're working a lot with the wrangling of data and also the publishing of data science, R tends to have a better ecosystem for that, particularly if you're a fan of the tidyverse. So it's horses for courses, I think, and if you want to be a really good data scientist, you should over time learn both, I think.
Are there any plans to write any additional books? Like, I sure could use one on, say, data viz. You got anything like that coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I don't think I'd be the right person to write a book on data viz, just because data visualization specialists, it's not just about the coding, it's about how you lay it out and the design and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not really a designer per se. One of the things I am interested in potentially doing is a book on natural language processing, particularly for our space, right, for the people analytics space, because it has huge applications. But it's moving so quickly, that I worry that when I start, by the time I finish it, I'll already have to go back and start writing it again.
Yeah, like what's a book to be written in the age of GPT-3? Like
right.
it's hard to stay relevant when things are moving that quickly. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So Keith, one of the things that I really appreciate about you, kind of the point earlier about the value of explanatory models and some of the wisdom that you bring, is you'll tackle things like common misconceptions in statistics, like things that people don't take into consideration that they should, or things along those lines. I don't know. Do you want to hit us with any of the common ones that you see that would be really great for our audience to hear?
Well, you put me on the spot there, but I mean, I'll just mention one that I actually made a post about a few days ago, which is linear regression. Right. So I think linear regression, everybody understands it as like the simplest form of explanatory model. Right. And as a result, people just think, OK, well, we're basically assuming that all our data is on a straight line. And just that very assumption is problematic. Right. Because we're not assuming that all our data is on a straight line. We're assuming that over many, many observations, the average of our data points is on a straight line. And that has huge consequences. And one of the side effects of not understanding that is that when people see the word confidence interval, they think that, when the model spits out a confidence interval for a particular data point, that the data point is going to be between 95% chance it's going to be between those two ends of the confidence interval. But that is actually wrong. What the model is saying is that over many, many experiments, the average of this data point will lie between that confidence interval. There's a much wider interval for any single data point, and that's what we call the prediction interval. And a lot of people just don't know that. Like a lot when I show people how to generate a prediction interval, they'll often say to me, "I never even knew that you could do that."
Yeah.
So that's a surprising one for me.
It's actually something, because I had to figure that out myself as well. I'm glad you brought that up. I have this might be a really deep question, or it might be a really stupid, simple question. But you have a math background, and I was actually thinking about this. Shows you the random things I think about. I was thinking about this the other day. Why is regression the most simple form of modeling? Like, is it possible for there to be a more simple form of modeling out there?
I mean, there's always a possibility for your models to be simpler, right? I mean, to give you an example, if you have a a binary outcome, 1 or 0, true or false, right, that you're modeling, a statistician will tend to go straight to binomial logistic regression for that, which has like a mathematical foundation
Yeah,
to it
exactly.
around the logistic function. But actually, you could, a lot of people will say to you, I will choose a simpler model, which is a linear probability model, right, where you're just modeling the probability on a straight line. So you're basically, it's a fudge between binomial regression and linear regression. And there's no argument why somebody can't do that. You basically can use any model you want, but when you use it, you have to be aware of why you've chosen it and what the assumptions are. Because if you're not, then you may be being false in your explanations of the results. And that's the important point, I think. It's like I'd never dictate what type of model to use, but I would dictate that, if you use a model, know what it is and know how to explain it.
I mean, speaking of that, in the consulting world, Cole as well. Have you seen stats be misapplied in perhaps a humorous way?
Yeah, yeah.
Wrongly applied. Yeah.
I mean, the typical one, right, is people jumping from an association to a causality. That's the most typical one, right? And particularly when you're in a business context, people are often very hypothesis driven in a business context, right? So they're
Yeah.
unlike a scientist who will often go into the problem saying, I don't know anything about this answer and I'm just going to build up the evidence and see where it takes me. In business, people are normally going in saying, I think this is what the answer is. And when you go in with that mindset, you're often then looking for anything that supports your answer, but kind of skipping over anything that might disagree with your answer. And
Selective inputs at
that
that
is
point, right?
exactly, and that's problematic. And one of the things you often see, right, is people will see a correlation between something, and they will immediately assume that is a causal effect. And there's a whole science around causal inference, right? But the typical example is the relationship between waffle houses and divorces, right? So the more waffle houses there are in a state, the higher the divorce rate.
Oh, we're from
the
Louisiana. We know about this. Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's a lot of Waffle Houses there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw a similar situation where like analysis came back as at a few companies back, where essentially if people selected 5, highly agree on a training exercise, then they had better outcomes. They were more likely to get promoted or this sort of thing. So the instructor started telling all the participants to put a 5 on their survey. It's just pure science,
exactly.
That's great reverse causality there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
and there are so many situations, right, where the conclusion, you'll draw a conclusion, but it's dangerous to publicize that conclusion because it could change the very basis of the problem that you've been dealing with in the first place, right?
yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this has creeped up every single place I've worked, and I do not know why. Is this just generalized misunderstanding of like bar charts? Like, well, males
yeah.
scored 69 and females scored 68, and therefore females are doing so much worse than males because the scores are 1 point different. It was like, are you kidding me? The scores are
Right.
virtually identical. And like, am I the one crazy person here? Because this happens all the time. I don't know why.
It does, yeah. The lack of hypothesis testing, the lack of knowledge around hypothesis testing is a really big problem in the kind of in the business world, I think. And again, often people are drawing those conclusions because those are the conclusions they've gone in with, and they're just looking for any evidence they can find to support them. But speaking of charts, by the way, I think one of the least used charts in the business world for good reason, right, is the pie chart. And if when you guys leave the session, and anyone who's listening can try this out, if you go into R and you seek help on the pie chart function, which is just pi, just put question mark pie in the console and then look at the help and read down the help a bit, and you'll see the statement that says pie charts are a very bad way to represent data. It actually says that in the help function.
But we still need it because people still use it and love it per se. I also must say that I have to look up in your book at least 4 times a year the difference between probability and odds ratio. I can never keep it straight. I always go to your resource.
I mean, that's the best. Like, why other statistics books don't explain it the way that you? Because I remember you came and spoke, Keith, at the DFW People Analytics meetup. We had a webinar that we hosted, and I complimented you about that there. This was like a year ago. But that's the GOAT. I mean, that's the best. I don't know. Maybe now we could switch to a section. And Keith, I don't think you've listened to these before, but we have a section called the nerdery, which is where we bring up different, let's call them nerdy topics that we want to cover. I don't know, Scott. I think you had one about college professors. Do you want to start there?
Oh, I wasn't going to start there, but we can.
Well, let's not start there. Let's start with something else.
There. Let's start with something else then. I didn't have that pulled up. Have you guys ever worked in an open office environment?
Actually, no.
Yeah, I mean, I have. I mean, basically, in our company, it's moved over the last couple of decades from, we used to be grouped into offices, but now most of the space is open space, and the rooms are for booking for meetings, for private meetings, or those sorts of things. So, I've certainly seen that change occur a lot over the last 20 years.
Yeah, there's going to be some implications when people start returning to office as well. Well, Adam Grant posted something, I don't know, probably like a week ago, and he essentially rails on this open office concept, saying that they cause 27% more sick days, 14% lower cognitive performance, 70% less face-to-face interaction. That's the really surprising one, because these are essentially designed to enable face-to-face interaction. But I mean, I don't know, you sit down at a table next to some dude eating corn nuts or something like that, and you just wind up putting your headphones on and trying to shut out the world, essentially.
It sounds like an experience you've had, Scott. Are you talking from experience there? Are you the corn nut guy or the guy that sits next to the corn nut guy?
I used to go over to our IT area, just kind of walk through and look at these miserable souls, having to sit shoulder to shoulder to people at their computers.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned, I've never actually sat in one of those areas, but that's not an accident, because any job I've interviewed for that actually had an open office set up, I've said, nope, not doing it, because I just see this. And then my one cynical take, and I know I've shared this on the podcast before, is, the genesis for open office plans, the cover story was that it was about, creativity and kind of creating serendipity and all that. But the reality was it was all about cutting costs from a real estate spend, because you can pack more people into a smaller amount of area with an open office concept. And I know that's might be the exception to the rule, because some companies do spread people out, but I think it's all a cover story. I don't know, Keith, do you have any experience with this? Did you meet Adam Grant at that Wharton conference that you went to back in 6 years ago?
I know Adam quite well. I've interacted with him and worked with him on a few things in the past, and I think often the statistics and the research doesn't necessarily explore why we're seeing these outcomes, right? And for me, that's the most important thing. And often our own experiences, if we have them, can drop some hints on that. I mean, I don't know about you, Scott, being in open office environments, but the likelihood is that you're going to camp down near people you don't really know. And as a result of that, you're less likely to talk to them, right, or get into social interactions with them. Whereas if you're in an actual office, a shared office with other people, then often you're all in that office for a reason. And even if you're not, because you're in there every day, you're going to get to know each other. Whereas, if you're in an open environment, you're probably sitting next to a different person every time you come in. So there's some, obvious social dynamics reasons why some of that might be occurring. And that would also lead me to conclude that, if you're allowed to, I mean, why come into an office if you're not going to interact with people, on a frequent basis? You might as well stay at home, right? Which probably, could drive higher absenteeism. So the reasons behind it are to me, are kind of more interesting than the statistics themselves.
I think there's a psychological component here as well. It's like if people did come in every day and talk to someone new, I mean, now you're sharing ideas, meeting new people, feeling more embedded in the organization, this sort of thing. But I have a feeling that people essentially just camp out at a spot, and you
Right.
walk in the office like, oh, that's where Cole usually sits, or this is where
Right.
Amy usually sits, or whatever, and it's not really as interactive as it could be. In fact, I saw a network, and I'll have to dig this up for the show notes. It was a network analysis article based on a quasi-experimental study, a natural experiment, where a organization went from a standard cubicle setup to a open office environment, and they put those sociometric badges on people so they
Yeah.
can measure how
Yeah.
close you are, like how long you talk, this sort of thing. And they found that people essentially put headphones in, they started communicating virtually. They just stopped talking to each other. It had total
Yep.
backfire effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can only speak to my own experience, which is that I love open space offices. I love the space. It just does something to helps me open my mind or something which I can't understand. But in our London office is lucky enough to have huge, big, high ceilinged open spaces, which I love working in. But the reason I go into the office really is to get away from my kids, because I've been working at home a lot over the pandemic, and your kids kind of they don't understand the boundaries between work and life. So at least when you're in the office, those boundaries exist by default. So I try to do it whenever I can.
Thank goodness your kids aren't listening to the podcast. My goodness, how offensive, Keith. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Well, here's
Well,
kind of
yeah,
another kind of like pandemic-y related topic. Scott and I found this Nature article, and for those of you who are not, scientists by nature, that was no pun intended there.
Naughty by
That
nature.
Yeah, that there's really two premier scientific journals around the globe. One is Science, and the other is Nature. So when you find like a finding that's come from one of these journals, usually it's considered one of the most robust findings that's out
yeah,
there. And this Nature article, it talks about how Zoom, or let's just call it video chatting in general in the workplace, is killing creativity. And I'll read the last line of the abstract of the article. It says our results suggest that virtual interaction comes with a cognitive cost for creative idea generation. And so one of the things that we've kind of had a running debate on the podcast about is kind of like the whole return to office, not returning to office, staying remote, and like kind of the cost and the benefits and the first and second and third order consequences of these decisions. And so I don't know, what do you guys think about this, that if you have a remote first company, what that's doing to creative ideas, especially if you're trying to be an innovative organization?
yeah. I mean, it's I again, my reaction is always to try and think about what's driving that observation, the results of that research. What are the causalities underlying it? Um, and it's a surprising result, to be honest, because you would expect that if you're remote, you have more time, available to concentrate and think, which should lead to greater creativity. But it also could be affected if the environment you're working in is full of distraction as well.
Yeah.
But which is often the case, I think. But it's a really surprising result, and it's not obvious to me why that would be the case.
You're coming to this a little bit blind, Keith. The article is absolutely fascinating. They use this eye tracking software, and they essentially found that people are focused on their screen. Like I don't know, like whenever I'm on a Zoom call or video conference, I just kind of stare at myself the entire time,
Mm,
and this places a cognitive load on people, which reduces their recall and ability to
mm.
think clearly. I've also said that like as soon as I hop on a call, my IQ drops like 20 points. This is sort of like self-affirming sort of
From
study
80
here.
to 60, Scott? No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
I'm
I
giving you a hard time.
wish. I wish I
Yeah.
had that high. I wish.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I don't know.
And I guess I'm a bit biased on that because as a computer programmer, I'm staring at a screen a lot anyway, irrelevant of whether I'm on calls or working remotely. So yeah, I'm guessing for non-computer programmers that difference could be quite substantial.
Yeah.
I'll just
Um,
speak from my kind of own personal experience here, but I do find this to be a real finding, but it really comes from an old finding, which comes from like the Lean Six Sigma type of research, which is around task switching. So that usually when you have to switch from one task to another task, you have like a 50% kind of refractory or reset period that it takes to get back up to speed. And so I find that if I'm in any kind of like creative outlet in this type of environment, and then a Slack message pops up, or I have to jump on a Zoom call and then jump back off, I get interrupted and I can't get back up to that really high baseline of creativity. That's kind of been my own personal feeling on this.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I
Absolutely.
think it's similar with a lot of deep cognitive processes, right? For example, if I'm in what I call code flow, right, which is where I'm deep into hacking a piece of code or trying to get something working, and then I suddenly have to join a call, I know that when I leave that call, I may not be able to restart it again until the next day because it takes such an effort to get back to where you were at that concentration level.
Yeah, there's some estimates that say it might be 20, 30 minutes before you can actually, refocus yourself after a Zoom call.
Yeah.
There's also the element of like, if you're trying to collaborate with somebody via Zoom, like it's just not the same. Like you can't read their body language. It's harder to interrupt people. The collaboration tools like whiteboarding just isn't the same as being in the physical room and writing on the wall, these sort of things.
Do you mind if I go kind of
Yeah.
random here for a second? This is not
I
something
love
we
it.
intended to talk about today, but I have seen some people in the academic sphere writing about this, and then I know very publicly Meta has talked about this as well, that they think that they're going to augment kind of the Zoom environment with AR or VR, so like the virtual reality or the AR. I imagine that's going to be just as glitchy as a Zoom call is, and it's going to be just as hard. But I don't know. Do you guys think that that's the future in terms of a remote based environment that we're all wearing haptic suits and we're talking to each other and I get to see your arms move like a robot kind of. I don't know. What do you think? Is that like is it going to be dystopia or utopia?
Yeah, I mean, I think your question there, Cole, is like a microcosm of the entire debate around the direction that Meta is going in, right? And the focus that Zuckerberg is putting on the metaverse. I mean, half the community thinks it's a visionary, and half the community thinks it's completely mad, right? I personally, I personally don't. I think a lot of augmented reality that we see currently in the world today is more gimmicky than useful. And I worry that would be the case when it's applied to kind of work-based interactions. Because let's admit one of the benefits of remote interaction, right, in Zoom is the fact that you can, you don't have to be seen if you don't want to, and that gives you a lot of freedom. Because sometimes people are not feeling well, or they're just not in the mood, and they don't want to go on screen.
Well,
And if you go into an environment, if you go into an environment where there's a lot of augmented reality and stuff, then that just creates a pressure for you to be, for your image to be present in that environment, and that would worry me a lot in terms of what the expectations on employees that are working remotely.
There was a recent study, I'll see if I can dig this up for the show notes as well, essentially showed that, go figure, attractive people tend to perform better in a real life situation, but only men retain this advantage over Zoom calls. I don't really know why,
Right.
but it's a recent study.
Well, I guess you and I will never know, Scott.
Oh man, I never know the advantage there. But
Yeah.
we have another study from Nature. It essentially says that 20% of all college professors come from just 8 universities in the U.S. You guys want to take a gander and do some guessing?
I mean, I'm gonna say it's pretty Ivy League heavy, but I
Yeah, I would
don't
assume
know the
so.
list.
Oh,
Is
you
it
might
is
you,
it
you
all
might be
Ivy? And maybe
surprised.
like throw in like a West Coast university, like a Berkeley or a Stanford or something like that.
Well, you got 2 of them. You got 2 of them right there. Any other guesses?
I mean, you'd have to think an MIT or something like that is in there.
You got it. You got it. You got Harvard as
Yeah.
well, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and my alma mater, University of Texas at Austin. So I mean, like,
Surprising to
Interesting.
see some state schools in there. That's it. That's impressive.
hook them, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But I mean, like, this has implications for if you do want to be a professor. prestige still
Yeah.
matters.
I guess it's
Yeah,
why
and you
Keith
see,
didn't get a professor job because he didn't go to UT. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right, Keith?
I didn't go to anywhere in the US. So. um, but but yeah, I mean, it is what we see this replicated across many environments, right? The simple fact is that it's an efficiency play that if you only have so much effort to put into looking for the people that you want, and if you're more likely to find them in the high-ranking institutions, then you'll look there first, and that creates a structural bias, I guess.
Yeah, it even says here the top 5 universities, so that's Berkeley, Harvard, Michigan, Wisconsin, Madison, and Stanford, produce more professors than all non-US schools combined.
I
Pretty
wonder what that
incredible.
does
Yeah.
from like, I don't know, like there's a lot of research on like diversity and creativity. I wonder if
Exactly.
there's that limits the amount of cognitive diversity that goes into
Hmm.
the professor, or is that called the academy or the I'm not even gonna get that word right. The professorships that are out there. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's got to be some kind of negative consequence of this.
Oh yeah, you
Yeah,
got
yeah.
echo
I mean,
chambers, the whole bit.
yeah, absolutely. And generalizing it out, we see it across the board as like a psychologist, like the kind of quality diversity trade off is always out there. That if you cut down on your diversity, it can massively impact um, you know cognitive interaction and idea generation and those sorts of things. But we constantly see in almost every walk of life that organizations and companies take the quickest route they can to find the hires that they need, purely because it's an efficiency play, right? And I wouldn't see why academia is any different from that. I think we're just seeing the same thing there.
Someone's already done the pre-screen for you, i.e.
Yeah, exactly.
MIT or Harvard, what have you.
It's like a
Yeah,
prolonged
yeah. I
job
mean,
interview, sort of.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, so Keith, I just think it's crazy. We were talking about this before the podcast. It's crazy, and it's also kind of funny that you're a member of PSYOP in the U.S. and you're considered an IO psychologist here, but that you're not considered a psychologist in Britain because the British Psychological Society. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that at all? I thought that was a hilarious part of your background.
Yeah, I mean, it shows that I think the US is more forward thinking in terms of what it means to be a practitioner in a given field, right? And there are many routes into being a practitioner. One route is that you start at age 18, you do your degrees, and you go straight into a job. Or another route is that you did something else early on, but then your work and the things you did after you studied took you into the field, and you learned in different ways. And what we see with PSYOP, for example, is that they are much more open to having members that have come to the field in a different way. They have a committee, and if you don't have an obvious PhD or a degree in IO psychology, then you can submit evidence to suggest that you still are qualified. And the committee reviews that and makes a decision to determine whether they view you as qualified, despite the fact that you don't have the traditional qualifications in the field, right? But there's no such process in the UK. So the UK is pretty strict in terms of how they charter membership, and they just say if you don't have an accredited or approved degree, you cannot be considered a part of. You cannot be considered a chartered psychologist. You can't join the society as such. I'm a much more in favor of the US way of thinking, because nowadays people come to their disciplines in many different ways, and we need to be open to that.
Well, Scott and I, as both as full members of PSYOP, we're very glad to have you, and we look poorly upon the Hogwarts rules that the UK is engaging in their society. So, we're like, come and join us, Keith. We'll take you on this side of the pond.
Fantastic.
Well, Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. How can folks get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Social media is probably the easiest way. I'm active in 3 routes on social media. I use LinkedIn for a lot of kind of business analytics related posts. There's a really burgeoning analytics community. A lot of people say that LinkedIn's kind of declined in quality over the last few years in terms of what you find on there. But I think one of the things that has been maintained is there's a lot of really fun and interesting conversation around the analytics space on that platform. That's one route. I do a lot of posting on Twitter as well, particularly around highly technical stuff. There's an excellent R community on Twitter. And then my Medium blog is another route. So I tend to write a lot of my longer thoughts via my Medium blog. And so people can always find me on there as well.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn took a tumble when I joined, essentially when it went downhill.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
knew there was
started
something
publishing
there.
articles and the quality went way down, you know. So, well, Keith, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been quite a pleasure, and I just can't thank you enough for what you do for our community. I don't know, Scott, any final words before we give Keith the last word on the podcast?
Go out, read Keith's book, donate to his charities.
Oh yeah, I forgot to ask you about that, Keith. Like this is, I really got inspired by this. I didn't know this in the past when you and I have chatted, but I found out through a little birdie that all of the I guess income that's generated through some of your endeavors, you actually donate to charity. I don't know. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean that's something I've been that's been important to me since day one, right? So the reason that I know all the things I know now, and the reason I have this expertise, is because I got it from the open source community, right? So I learned it all from volunteers. So it doesn't feel right to me that then I would use that knowledge to, further my own financial situation because I got it for free. So I should give it back for free. And so, but nevertheless, and I do give it back for free in the terms of it's all available online. But where there is revenue to be made through publishers and things, then that can also be used for a good cause. And that's where I thought, I'm not going to say no to putting it into print. But if I do put it into print, I want to make sure that whatever revenue is generated goes to something useful. And so over the last couple of years, it's been going to various, charities to kind of support diversity in programming, but also the situation in Ukraine and various other things. And that's really important to me, and I'm going to keep doing that.
Keith, I think that's a delightful place to stop. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for what you do for our field and for just the world as a whole. You've been
Absolutely.
listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics Podcast with Colin Scott. Thanks for joining us today, Keith.
Thank you, guys.